Aloha, everyone. My name is David Louie, and thank you all for joining us here for the Hawaii Book and Music Festival today. And I have with me here a man who needs no introduction, but I'm going to give him one anyway. Former Governor Neil Abercrombie, who served as the 7th governor of the state of Hawaii from December 2010 to December 2014. And before that, he served admirably in the State House of Representatives and the State Senate. And then he was elected to the U.S. Congress, where he served 10 terms and represented Hawaii at the national level. He served on the Armed Services Committee and the Natural Resources Committee. And then in 2010, he came back and ran for governor and then served as governor. And I am proud to have served with him. Governor.
Thank you very much, David. Aloha, everybody. I was taking a look at the festival poster there, and I saw that picture of myself as moderator. I very seldom have been a moderator, David, I think. And I thought to myself, why is that man smiling? Well, one of the reasons I am smiling today and smiling that picture is to be a moderator for this particular session of From the Desk of the Attorney General. That's the book, which I have right here. I want to show everybody. Those pink slips there are all the places in the book that I'm convinced that David is absolutely wrong in what he's saying, because my name is involved in it right there. But the plain fact is that I couldn't be more pleased that you've written this memoir, David. It's really excellent all the way through. The cover, if people noticed on the cover, is of a desk. And that desk has a lot of meaning for you. And it has a particular meaning because of your career, the career that you had before you became Attorney General. You were Attorney General from 2011 to 14 through my term. And you've been a president of the Hawaii State Bar Association. You were a noted partner with Kobayashi Sugita Goda. And a leading litigator and attorney in the most complex forms of law. And your name came to me as a result of a very, very good transition team who was out there looking for the very, very best person that we could get to be Attorney General. Because one of the important things that I think distinguishes Hawaii and distinguished your term is that you appoint, if you are governor, you appoint an attorney general. We don't elect attorney generals. And that was a key element in the decision that was made by me as to who the most capable person was of all of the names who came to me. And that was David Louie. So I couldn't be more proud to have the opportunity to moderate this memoir, David, as embodied in From the Desk of the Attorney General. And I'm hoping that perhaps you can elucidate for our audience just what that symbol on the cover of your book is all about and why that explains who you are as Attorney General. What do you think about my proposition, so to speak, in the introduction that by picking the Attorney General, there's a process involved, one that now does not exist. I guess I could say that you're the last Attorney General to be picked under the system that I approved of, that I stand by today, and which has been essentially overturned by the Judicial Selection Committee. I think it would be interesting for our listeners, our guests, to know a little bit more about that as to what the Office of the Attorney General, in terms of its true independence, in terms of picking an Attorney General from the broadest possible and deepest possible foundation.
Right. So, Governor, the process of picking the Attorney General in Hawaii is still intact, and it still is a choice of the governor. And that's like the federal model where the president picks the Attorney General. In other states, in most other states, the Attorney General is elected. But in Hawaii and 4 other states, the Attorney General is appointed by the governor. I think what you're referring to is the process of the selection of judges, which is through the Judicial Selection Commission, and is now one that involves the publication of the names. And it's come up recently in the news about that, so that so that the candidates or the people of the top 4 to 6 names who are on the list are known to the public, and sometimes they can try and stop people from being judges because of that process, which I don't think really serves the process. I think it's important that an elected official such as yourself, as the governor, has the right to pick the judges that should serve, and that's why we elect somebody like yourself.
Pick 2 or 3 yourself. Let's start with whatever you think exemplified one of the, let's say, the toughest thing for you. Not so much to decide, because in the end I had to make decisions based on the best information and perspective I could gather. But what would you say was the top issue that you had to face that you brought to me in terms of decision making?
Right, and there were several. There were big issues that I was fortunate and privileged to work with you on. And I think the biggest one, and the one that I was most proud of for working on with you, was the issue of marriage equality, same-sex marriage, marriage equity, which is today it seems so commonplace that everybody recognizes that gay and lesbian couples have a right to marry the person they love just like everybody else, and that's a basic matter of human dignity. But only just a short while ago, it was hotly contested, and it's still contested in some areas of the country. I don't think so much in Hawaii, and we can talk about that. I think that's important. And another one, which is really, really important to me, was the settlement of some Native Hawaiian issues that you and I worked on together, because Hawaii is so unique. It's the only state that used to be a kingdom that was overthrown illegally by the United States. And there's so many Native Hawaiian people here who, quite frankly, got the short end of the stick over the years. The state owes an obligation to them. And so there are issues, but these are very complex legal, political, and cultural issues, as you well know.
Yeah, you mentioned 10 terms in Congress. I recall one time when a very conservative Republican from Iowa was on the very much on the issue of the Kaka bill, and it came to see me. And it was in our Interior Committee, our Resources Committee. And he wasn't on the committee, so he said, can I talk to you about this? What's all this about these Hawaiians? Why should they get special notes? And I said to him, Steve, I said, would you mind spending a few minutes with me so I can explain the history of the land tenure system in Hawaii, from a kingdom to a shotgun republic, to a territory of the United States, to becoming the 50th state of the Union? He said, I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, people who want to ignore history are doomed to repeat it, as that famous saying goes. But it's very important, and it's important in Hawaii that people understand what that history is, so that we can do right by the Native Hawaiian people.
And when you mentioned the issue of marriage equity, just there, same-sex marriage, marriage equity, equality, the words go back and forth, the phrases go back and forth, because there's pejorative commentary that comes out of it. And you may recall, David, that when I brought up the idea of a special session, maybe we can explore that a little bit. Remember, I said to you, David, the ironic thing about this whole discussion that we're having about marriage equity, marriage equality, same-sex marriages, I said, 5 years from now, after we pass this, nobody will remember what the argument was about.
Yeah, exactly. And that was a signature issue, quite frankly. I remember it very well because it was very complex in a number of ways and very simple in a number of ways. But the whole issue of same-sex marriage equity, it started with the Hawaii Supreme Court decision back in 1993, and they said, Justice Stephen Levinson wrote an opinion and said, hey, this is a basic human right. Equal protection means people can marry. You can't.
Wow, what a concept.
Yeah, I know. And that scared the living daylights out of all the people who hated gay and lesbian couples. And they rushed around the country and passed constitutional amendments prohibiting that so that they could be on an equal footing with the Equal Protection Amendment. And even in Hawaii, there was a backlash. There was a backlash in Hawaii, and Hawaii passed the constitutional amendment. But what was interesting was the constitutional amendment here said the legislature gets to decide.
Exactly.
It was very interesting.
That's an important point, David, because a lot of people forget about that. I remember very well being disappointing so many of my friends and supporters because I supported that constitutional amendment. They said, how can you support that constitutional amendment? Because when you're for marriage equity, and this is against, I said, no. What this amendment does, it says the legislature has to get the decision. I said, I've supported the commoners against the king, the legislature against the governor as a check and balance in government all my life. How can I say, because there's an issue that I'm in favor of, I got to be against this amendment when it actually backs up what I've been in favor of all along in terms of the legislature? So the question of the bill then came up because that gave us an opportunity to actually directly affect the idea of whether or not it would be possible for everybody to get married.
That's absolutely right. And it was a super important distinction because all of these other legislatures went and passed constitutional amendments that prohibited same-sex marriage. And then you had to go through the complex process of reversing that through a constitutional amendment, which takes 2 or 3 years. And here we could reverse it just with the legislature passing a new law.
Okay, and that, David, can you run for our audience then? Run through why? See, you were the fulcrum in this. You, the Attorney General's office, that is to say, your able deputies. I came to you guys and said, you've got to give me the means to make this happen. Can you run through for our audience, what did the Attorney General office do in order? What process did you follow? What did you have to come to grips with in order to be able to say to me, okay, Governor, you can call a special session of the legislature now to address this bill?
Right.
I'm confident that this does the job. How do we get there?
Well, we had a lot of able people who did a lot of research, and we looked at it. It was a very complex thing because there were lawsuits that were filed against us already, against the state, to invalidate the prohibition. And there were lawsuits, in Hawaii, there was a lawsuit in California, there were lawsuits in many states, and there was a lawsuit that was making its way up to the United States Supreme Court. And then as all of that was happening, and we were defending the state in the lawsuits, and I remember having long conversations with you because you wanted to take the exact same view that President Obama took and that Governor Jerry Brown took and said, hey, this is wrong. We're not going to defend this law. But there were others in the legislature who wanted to defend the law. And generally, the Attorney General defends the laws that exist. And so we did two things. We gave you a team of deputies who said, this is absolutely wrong. Same-sex marriage should be allowed. Marriage equity should be allowed. And we had another team of deputies that took the view of the legislature that said, our laws have to be respected. And the important thing is then the United States Supreme Court said, hey, same-sex marriage is absolutely allowed. Absolutely allowed. You cannot prohibit it. It is a prohibition is barred by the Equal Protection Amendment of the United States Constitution. And once that happened, then it was really just a matter of time of getting the legislature to move and to change the law. And I remember we had long conversations about doing that, and you had long conversations with the legislators, and a number of them wanted to just do it in regular session. And you had the foresight and wisdom to call a special session because just to focus on this gigantic issue. And that was a big deal. And I remember that special session. Okay. I know you remember it well because there were busloads of supporters and opponents coming in. There were demonstrations every day. There was press.
And night.
Yeah, and night. It went on into the night. And it went on for a couple of months, and the legislature, there's no way they could have done any regular business while considering this issue. So it was important that we had special session because it would not have happened without a special session. And so I was very pleased that, I testified in favor of it. There were very moving testimonies that were given by people. I remember Senator Gil Kahele, who's Kai Kahele's father, who gave a moving speech and talked about how mahus in the Hawaiian culture, Native Hawaiian culture, were respected and regarded as people to be respected, even though they were gay, homosexual. And there was nothing wrong with that. So there was a long tradition. But people, tended to forget history. So some people were opposed to it. But after all of that, and then there was just lots of testimony. And finally, the bill passed after a lot of hoopla. A lot of negative things were said. But I remember you had a great ceremony. We had a signing ceremony. And you brought Nanina Bear, who was the very first plaintiff, who had filed the very first lawsuit back in the early 1990s. And that was the very first lawsuit. And you brought her in, and she was there at the signing. And I remember you said, you read this letter from one of your friends that said, those who were invisible are no longer invisible and can be seen by everybody. I thought it was tremendously moving. I was very proud to just be a part of the whole effort.
Well, speaking of future generations then, and we've already mentioned some of the issues around Native Hawaiian interests and concerns, perhaps you could go into that a little bit, because we were dealing with issues, and particularly in Kaka'ako and Kaka'ako-Mauka and Oha.
Absolutely. So one of the interesting things when I came into office was that there had been debts owed by. So let me back up a little bit. The Constitution of Hawaii sets forth obligations of the state to both the Department of Hawaiian Homelands and also we created the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. And this is before my time, but it was created.
Well, as a matter of fact, just for perspective's sake, for our audience, that was created when I was in the legislature in the 70s under the very able leadership, Ways and Means Chairman of Ben Cayetano and Frenchie DeSoto and some other. Most everybody associated with that has passed on to their rewards. Ben and I are still paying for our sins, but. We put that together specifically because the idea, the motivation was, shouldn't Hawaiians be in charge of their own destiny to the extent and capacity that's available to us? Because with the original entering into the 50 states, and the 49 and becoming the 50th state, what had been royal lands, what had been ceded lands, and so on, were specifically set aside in terms of benefit for Hawaiians in recognition of that. And so the original Office of Hawaiian Affairs was not meant to impose the state further on Native Hawaiians, but rather to give Native Hawaiians an opportunity to have real sovereignty with respect to the lands that had previously been associated with the kingdom.
Absolutely. And that's an important thing, and it's an important recognition by the state. But then always the devil's in the details. And so the
legal details.
The legal details, and that's where the Attorney General comes in. And the state had said that one of the 5 purposes that was OHA was supposed to be funded out of these royal lands that had been given back. They were ceded. They were the royal lands that had been given over to taken actually, not given over, taken by the federal government. And then those were given back in large part, not all. There's still a number of federal lands that are former Hawaiian lands. But they were given back to the state of Hawaii, and they are known as the ceded lands. And they have revenue from them, from the airport and from various places. And a portion of that revenue was to be given to fund OHA. But the devil is always in the detail as to how you calculate that. And so there had been these long-standing disagreements between OHA and the state auditors and accountants and budget and finance as to how much they were entitled to and how you would calculate that. And those had been going on for the last time it had been settled as to an amount was 30 years before. And so for 30 years, there'd been this long running dispute. And the number, according to the Native Hawaiians, according to OHA, was somewhere $400 to $600 million. And the state obviously disputed that, and the state thought it was much less, but we recognized that there was some amount owed. And the question was, what?
The question was, could we make a deal?
Exactly. And Ben Cayetano tried to settle this. He couldn't settle it. Governor Lingle tried to settle it. She couldn't settle it. People had been doing it for a long time. And so finally, it came to me and it came to you. And you said, let's go make the deal. Okay. That's the difference.
The answer previously, of course, had been around money. And I thought, well, what about the land then? Because we're not making any more of it. What about land and the money that could be made from that land? Well, that was kind of, I was thinking, okay, how do we get around this? How do we get through it? How do we get under it? How do we get over it?
That's absolutely true. And also, when you and I first came into office, we were in the throes of the Great Recession. We were still in it. There was no money. We were underwater. You were looking everywhere, under every rock and cranny for money to help run the state.
We were $250 million in deficit the day I walked in the door.
Right. And so to get money to give to OHA was going to be impossible. And there had been some prior land deals on the table, but in order to get a land deal, if you're going to give any land in Hawaii that is state land and transfer it to somebody else, even if it's another agency in the state, you have to get legislative approval. And so some of the prior initiatives had foundered and on the rocks of getting legislative approval. And so we were able to cut a deal, and basically we said, look, we'll give you some land. They had in prior times, some Native Hawaiian groups had objected to the selection of lands. And so I remember talking with you and you said, look, let's take the best lands that we have and that are being underused and underutilized by the state. And
that are worth real money.
That's right. And that was Papahanaumokuakea. And by just saying, well, look, how about if we give you guys 200 million, roughly, plus or minus, we're not going to have a true up. We're not going to have an accounting. We're not going to fight over pennies. We'll give you parcels of land that make up approximately 200 million, and we'll settle this debt. And we reached agreement with them, and they were agreeable. I worked with Bill Mehiula, who's a fine Native Hawaiian attorney who represented the Office of Hawaiian Affairs and was able to cut the deal. Charlene Ina of my staff was very instrumental in helping to cut the deal. And we went in and cut the deal, and then we had to sell it to the legislature. And that was its own challenge in order to get that through. But you and your staff worked the political angles on that and got that through. And Bill and OHA, that was Chair Colette Machado, who was very instrumental in this, they had to go out and sell it to the Native Hawaiian community.
When you say Bill, you mean Bill Isla?
No, Bill Mehiula. Bill Isla was
sorry, yeah, okay.
Bill Mehiula was the attorney who represented OHA. Bill Isla was a prominent Native Hawaiian person who was the chair of the Department of Land and Natural Resources.
Yeah.
So we were able to get the deal done, and then transfer a number of the parcels to the Office of Hawaiian Affairs in Kaka'ako-Makai. And that remains, they've been talking, and I'm hopeful that they will be able to make something of that. They would like to get some residential permission, but that's a difficult area. And they have the opportunity, I think, to try and make something of that there. And it's worth real money. It's very valuable land, very valuable land. So.
So in other words, at this stage, then, if the Hawaiians want to have control over their destiny, they're also going to then have to engage in politics and deals.
Absolutely. And that's always, that's the difficulty for all of us. That's sort of the conundrum of a democracy and the form of government we have is you actually have to listen to the other guy who has an opposing point of view and sit down and try and figure out where you have shared values and shared goals so that you can make a deal and move forward together.